No one listened when the dog barked and scratched at that filthy backpack. But hidden inside was a secret so dark, it would shatter lives and unravel a crime no one saw coming. Rain had been falling all night, soft and steady, painting the sidewalks of Portland in silver streaks. Most people had gone home, tucked away behind warm windows and locked doors. But one figure still moved through the shadows, her paws wet, her fur matted, her breath coming in quiet huffs. They called her Maggie. No one knew where she came from, not exactly. Some said she used to belong to an old woman who died alone in a trailer on the east side. Others claimed she'd been part of a dogfighting ring, but had escaped. But the truth was simpler. Maggie had just always been there, in the corners of the city where people stopped looking. She was a shepherd mix, probably part Belgian Malinois, with a patchy tan coat and amber eyes that had seen too much. Her right hind leg dragged just a little, from a break that never healed right. But she moved with purpose, with heart, and even though she had no collar, no home, and no real name, people in the homeless camps near Burnside Street looked after her like she was one of their own. And in return, Maggie watched over them. She slept beneath the benches at night, shared scraps with the others, and growled at anyone who came too close with bad intentions. The street kids joked she was the guardian of the ghosts, but Maggie didn't care for names or praise. She only cared about one person: Joe. Joe Carter was 62, with a gray beard, a heavy coat that never came off, and eyes that never stayed still. He didn't talk much. He didn't beg. He didn't cause trouble. Most days, he just sat on the same corner near the old post office, back against the wall, wore an army backpack in his lap like it held everything he had left. No one knew what war had done to Joe, but whatever it was, it had chased the words right out of him. He spoke in grunts, nods, and short bursts that didn't always make sense. But Maggie understood him. Somehow. She had started following him months ago, weaving through alleyways behind him, sleeping a few feet away every night. At first, Joe threw things at her, cursed, even kicked at her once when the nightmares got too loud. But Maggie didn't leave. She just lay back down, tail tucked, eyes on him, always watching. Eventually, he stopped trying to scare her off. Eventually, he even started saving part of his sandwich for her. He never called her by name, but sometimes he'd murmur, "All right, girl," under his breath, and Maggie would wag her tail once, just once, like it was all she needed to hear. Together, they moved through the city like ghosts, forgotten, invisible, and yet always there. Joe with his haunted eyes and Maggie with her slow, limping stride. Two souls broken in different ways, stitched together by quiet loyalty. And in a world that had turned its back on both of them, that was enough. At least, until the day Maggie scratched open a secret that would change everything. The city park was quiet that morning. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind puddles that reflected the cloudy sky. Somewhere in the distance, a bus hissed to a stop, and pigeons pecked at crumbs near the bench where Joe Carter slept. He lay curled up on the cold wood, his coat pulled tight around him, and his worn-out army backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. That bag had been with him longer than most people. It held everything he owned: a few clothes, an old photo, a pocket Bible, and some things he never talked about. Things from the war, things from after. Maggie lay beneath the bench, pressed against the concrete. She hadn't slept much. Something in the air had her on edge. Her ears flicked every few seconds, and her nose twitched with every gust of wind. Then, suddenly, she stood up. She crept to Joe's side, sniffed the backpack, and let out a low, uneasy whine. Joe didn't stir. He was deep in whatever place his dreams had taken him. Maggie sniffed again, this time more urgently. Her paw reached up and scratched at the fabric. Joe mumbled and shifted, pulling the bag closer to his chest. But Maggie wasn't done. She barked once, loud and sharp. Then she began scratching harder, digging at the zippers with her paws, pushing her nose into the seams. She let out a soft growl, not angry, but alert. Something was wrong. Joe groaned and opened one eye. "Maggie," he muttered, his voice gravel in sleep. "Stop." He reached out to push her back, but she jumped up again, clawing at the side pocket now. Her nails scraped against the nylon. She barked again, louder this time. Birds fluttered into the sky from the nearby trees. "Enough!" Joe snapped, sitting up and yanking the bag to his lap. His hands trembled slightly as he unzipped the side pocket just to shut her up. But as soon as he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. Inside was something he hadn't put there. A small bundle of fabric, soft and pink. A baby blanket. Dirty, soaked through with something dark encrusted. Blood. Joe stared, frozen. Beneath it, a phone. The screen was cracked, but it still lit up. Dozens of missed calls from the same number. And one text, sitting at the top of the screen like it had been waiting. "If you hurt her, you'll pay. We're calling the cops." Joe's hands shook. What the hell? He looked around, but no one was nearby yet. Just a jogger far off on the trail. Maggie was sitting now, her body tense, her eyes locked on the open pocket. Joe pulled the blanket out slowly. A tiny cartoon bear was stitched into the corner. He knew he hadn't taken it. He would never take something like this, but somehow, it was in his bag. And now, it was in his hands. Someone put this in here," he whispered, his voice cracking. No, this ain't mine." But it didn't matter what he said. Maggie had known. Somehow, she had known. And now the truth was about to come out. Joe stared at the blanket in his hands, his mouth slightly open, his breath shallow. The little cartoon bear stitched into the corner stared back at him, its smile faded, its fabric stained dark red. Blood. Real blood. His fingers tightened around the soft fabric, then let go like it had burned him. Maggie sat in front of him, eyes locked on the bag, ears twitching. She wasn't barking anymore. She was waiting. Joe reached back into the pocket and pulled out the phone. It was cheap, plastic, the kind you buy with cash and throw away. The screen lit up with a weak blue glow, full of missed calls. One number over and over again. He tapped the home button. The wallpaper was a photo of a little girl, maybe 4, maybe 5. Brown eyes, pigtails, a gap-toothed smile. Joe felt his stomach twist. He opened the text messages. The last one sat at the top, plain and direct. "If you hurt her, you'll pay. We're calling the cops." "No," Joe whispered, shaking his head. No, I didn't. I don't know this." His voice was trembling now, loud enough for people nearby to hear. A man selling hot dogs from a cart across the path looked over. Joe didn't notice. He was standing now, pacing in small circles, the blanket still in one hand, the phone in the other. "I don't know this kid," he said louder. "I didn't take anything. Someone must have swapped it. At the shelter. It ain't mine." Maggie got up and circled him slowly, her body tense. She wasn't growling, but she wasn't calm either. Joe looked at her, eyes wide. "You believe me, right, girl?" he asked. "You saw me sleep with that bag. You saw." His voice cracked at the edges. He looked down at the phone again, then back at the blanket, then shoved both back into the bag like putting them away would somehow make them disappear. The hot dog vendor narrowed his eyes. He couldn't hear everything, but he heard enough. Blood. Kid. Cops. That was more than enough. He pulled out his phone and called 911. "I don't know what's going on," he said, eyes fixed on Joe. "But there's a homeless guy yelling about a kid, and there's blood, and he looks like he's freaking out. You might want to send someone." Across the park, 2 kids on skateboards paused to watch. A jogger slowed down. People were noticing. Joe could feel it too. The world was turning toward him, and it was turning fast. He dropped back to the bench and clutched his head in his hands. "Why would someone do this?" he whispered. "Why put that in my pack?" Maggie sat down beside him. She didn't touch him. She just kept her eyes on the bag. It had started with her, and whatever came next, she wasn't going to let him face it alone. The wail of sirens broke the quiet of the park. People stepped back, giving space as 2 police cars rolled up onto the grass. Doors opened fast. Officers stepped out with firm voices and careful hands. They didn't draw their weapons, not yet. but their eyes were sharp, scanning everything. Joe didn't move from the bench. His hands were up, trembling. His eyes were wide with fear, confusion, and something else too. Shame, maybe, or exhaustion. Maggie stood between him and the approaching officers. Her body was tense, tail low, ears back, but her growl was steady. Not loud, but deep, protective. One of the cops hesitated. "She's guarding him," he said. "I can see that," the other replied, stepping forward slowly, hand on his belt. "Hey there, girl, easy. We're not gonna hurt him." But Maggie didn't move. Not until Joe spoke, his voice broken and tired. "It's okay, Mags," he said. "Let him come." She looked back at him, just for a second, then stepped to the side, staying close but no longer blocking the path. Two officers came forward. One gently took the backpack from Joe's side and opened it. The pink blanket was still there, dark with dried blood. The phone lit up as he lifted it. "Check this out," the officer said to his partner. "You see the lock screen?" The other leaned in. His eyes narrowed. "Layla Ramos," he said, almost under his breath. "That's her. That's the missing girl. The Amber Alert from 3 nights ago. 4 years old. Taken outside her daycare. This is her." The photo showed a little girl in a yellow dress with a stuffed bear in her arms. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, her cheeks still stained with dried tears. She wasn't smiling. Joe looked like the breath had been knocked out of him. "I didn't take her," he said quickly. "I swear to God, I didn't put that stuff in my bag. Someone switched it. It wasn't me." "We're going to talk about that," one of the officers said gently. "But we need to take you in, sir, you understand?" Joe nodded slowly, his voice gone. They handcuffed him, not roughly, but firmly, and led him toward the cruiser. Maggie followed, tail tucked but determined. When the officer opened the back door to load Joe in, Maggie tried to jump in first. "Whoa, hold on," one cop said, grabbing at her collar. But she pulled away and leapt into the seat next to Joe. "She's not leaving him," the other officer said. "Might be better to let her ride." Joe looked at Maggie and gave a tired nod. "You always know when it's bad," he whispered. "Don't you?" She leaned her head against his arm, her eyes never leaving the street as the door closed and the car pulled away. And behind them, the park grew quiet again, but the photo of Layla Ramos burned in every officer's mind. They had a child to find, and time was running out. Joe sat in the small, windowless room, his hands resting on the cold metal table. The cuffs were off now, but the weight of suspicion still hung heavy on his shoulders. His coat was damp from the ride, and his boots left wet marks on the floor. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He knew this was serious. Outside the glass wall, Maggie paced back and forth, her nose pressed to the glass every few steps, her eyes locked on Joe. She didn't bark or whine, but her body stayed tense, like she was waiting for something to go wrong. Detective Ellis watched her for a long moment before turning back to Joe. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, calm, the kind of person who didn't rush to judgment. She sat down across from him, setting a small recorder on the table. "Okay, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice steady. "Let's go over this again. You say someone may have swapped your bag?" Joe nodded. "At the shelter. Couple nights back. I didn't notice right away. Looked like mine. Felt like mine. Didn't check every pocket. Just figured it was still my stuff." Ellis leaned in slightly. "Tell me about the man who offered to buy your bag. What did he look like?" Joe rubbed his face with both hands, then looked up. He was clean, too clean for that place. Dark suit, no dirt, shiny shoes. Didn't belong. Had this scar right here. He tapped the corner of his mouth. Looked like a cigarette burn, real nasty. Anything else? He had some kind of badge. Said he worked for a group helping kids, Hope Hands or something like that. But he wasn't there to help nobody. Said he'd give me $50 for the bag. I said no. Then he was just gone. Ellis wrote something in her notebook, eyes flicking up to him every few seconds. "You ever seen him before?" "No." "Since?" "No." Ellis clicked her pen shut. "And you didn't put the phone or that blanket in your backpack?" Joe looked her straight in the eye. "No, ma'am. I swear. I might be many things, but I'm not that." They sat in silence for a few seconds. Ellis turned toward the glass. Maggie had stopped pacing. She was sitting now, watching Ellis through the window, her ears up, her head tilted. "She yours?" Ellis asked. Joe shook his head. "Not really. She just found me one day. Won't leave me alone now." Ellis smiled slightly. "She seems to think you're worth something." Joe looked down at the table. "First one in a long time who does." Ellis stood and walked to the door. She paused and looked back at him. "I believe you, Joe. But I need more than belief. I need proof. That girl in the photo is still out there, and I think your dog knows something we don't." Joe nodded slowly. "Then listen to her. She's got better instincts than most people I've known." Outside the door, Maggie stood as Ellis opened it. The detective crouched down, meeting the dog's eyes. "All right, girl," she said softly. "Let's find that child." The Salvation Mission shelter was quiet that afternoon. The lunch crowd had already moved on, leaving behind half-empty trays and the soft clatter of dishes being cleaned in the kitchen. Inside the small office at the back of the building, the air smelled like coffee and old carpet. The light from a dusty window fell across the screen of a computer monitor. Detective Ellis leaned in, arms crossed, as the shelter's manager, a wiry man named Pete, fast-forwarded through the security footage. Maggie sat in the corner, her head resting on her paws, eyes flicking between the screen and the door. Joe stood behind Ellis, hat in hand, shifting from foot to foot like he wanted to disappear. "All right here," Pete said, pausing the footage. "This is from 2 nights ago. That's Joe there, coming in around 7:15. Got his backpack with him, just like he said." Joe nodded. "That was the night I grabbed a spot near the heater." Pete clicked play. Joe could be seen setting down his bag, rubbing his hands together, and sitting in the far corner of the shelter's sleeping room. Others came and went, some talking, some curling up on the thin mats that lined the walls. Then a man stepped into frame. "There," Joe said, pointing at the screen. "That's him." Ellis watched closely. The man was well dressed for a place like this. Dark coat, black gloves, clean shoes. He moved with purpose, not the aimless shuffle of someone who needed a place to stay. He looked around, then slowly made his way toward Joe's spot. He glanced over his shoulder, then crouched down like he was adjusting something in his own pack. But he didn't have a bag. They all watched as he slipped something into the side pocket of Joe's backpack. Quick, smooth, like he'd done it 100 times before. Pete whistled low. "That's no accident." "Can you zoom in?" Ellis asked. Pete worked the controls, focusing on the man's upper body. As the image sharpened, they could see a badge clipped to his coat. It read "Hopekind" in bold blue letters, next to a logo of 2 open hands cradling a heart. Ellis's face went still. "You know them?" Joe asked. She nodded slowly, her voice quiet. "Yeah, I know them." Hopekind was a registered nonprofit. They ran youth centers, food drives, after-school programs. On paper, they were a shining light in the community. But Ellis had heard whispers, rumors, complaints that went nowhere, missing reports, things that didn't add up. She'd tried to look into it once, years ago, but the trail had gone cold. Too many locked doors. Too many people saying the right things in public and hiding the truth behind closed ones. She stepped away from the screen and looked out the window. "He planted that phone," she said. "He wanted it to be found, but not by just anyone." Joe furrowed his brow. "You think he meant for me to take the fall?" Ellis turned to face him. "Maybe. Or maybe he was sending a message. Either way, we're not done yet." Maggie stood up and moved to Ellis's side, her eyes steady. She didn't need a badge to know when something was wrong, and whatever Hopekind was hiding, it had just become her mission too. The rain had started again by the time Maggie slipped out of the precinct. It wasn't hard for her. Someone left the side door cracked open, just enough for a smart dog to nose through. No one noticed. She moved quietly, her paws light on the wet pavement, her breath puffing little clouds in the cool air. Maggie didn't look back. She wasn't running away. She was running to something. She weaved through streets she knew better than most people, past the trash bins behind the diner, where Joe used to get free coffee. Past the crumbling wall behind the shelter where they would rest when all the beds were full. Past the alley. That alley. She stopped there for a long moment, standing still under the metal fire escape. It was where she had first started following Joe. The scent of old oil and rotting wood was strong, but beneath it, something else had crept in. Something sharp. Something wrong. She sniffed the ground, her nose moving quickly, her ears turning with every sound. Then, she caught it. A faint trace. Not Joe. Not food. Something. Small. Fragile. Frightened. Her body went tense. Her tail stiffened. Then she moved again. She followed the scent across 2 streets and around a long chain-link fence near the edge of the docks. The sky hung low and gray above her. The sound of seagulls echoed faintly through the mist. Maggie trotted toward a large warehouse, long abandoned, its wooden door half-rotten and hanging from the hinges. She ducked inside. The building smelled of damp wood, rusted metal, and mold. But underneath it all was something else. Blood. Not much, but enough. Maggie's nose led her to a corner behind a stack of old pallets and broken furniture. There, half hidden under a tarp, was a small shoe. Pink, spotted with glitter, covered in dirt, and stained with something dark. Maggie lowered her head and sniffed it, then let out a deep bark. Once, then again, and again. She barked so loudly that people 2 blocks away heard her. An older woman in the apartment across the alley looked out her window and saw the dog. She recognized Maggie. Everyone around here did. But something was different now. The dog wasn't begging or pacing. She was calling out for help. The woman called the police. By the time Detective Ellis arrived, 2 patrol cars were already on the scene. Officers had blocked off the street, unsure what they were dealing with. Maggie hadn't left her spot. She sat next to the shoe, still barking when they came in, like she was afraid they might miss it. Ellis stepped inside, her shoes crunching on broken glass. When she saw Maggie and the tiny shoe, her breath caught in her throat. "She's leading us somewhere," Ellis said quietly. Maggie's eyes flicked up to meet hers, full of urgency and something else too. She had found something, and she wasn't going to stop until everyone knew what it meant. The warehouse stood quiet in the early morning light, a crumbling skeleton of what it once was. Rust streaked down its sides like old tears, and weeds pushed through the cracks in the concrete. The only sound came from the low growl of patrol cars idling nearby, and the occasional bark from Maggie, who still waited by the door, pacing. Detective Ellis stood with 2 officers outside the entrance. She looked down at the dog and gave a small nod. "All right, girl," she said, her voice calm. "Let's see what you found." Inside, the air was cold and damp. The scent of mildew and dust clung to every surface. The place had clearly been abandoned for years, but the deeper they went, the more signs they saw that someone had been here recently. New footprints in the dirt, fresh scuff marks on the floor. A faint, sweet smell, like apple juice gone sour. Maggie moved ahead, ears up, nose low to the ground. She led them toward the back of the warehouse, where a stack of wooden crates leaned against one wall. Ellis squinted, noticing that one panel behind the crates didn't quite match the others. It was cleaner, newer. "Get these out of the way," she said. The officers pulled the crates aside, revealing a panel of drywall. One officer tapped it with his knuckles. It echoed hollow. Another used the end of his flashlight to poke at the edge. The panel shifted. Behind it was a narrow, hidden space, no wider than a hallway, stretching along the wall. Ellis stepped in first, careful with each step. Her flashlight beam swept across the floor and stopped. There were blankets, small ones, the kind with cartoon animals. A juice box tipped on its side, still half full. A pile of toys, some broken, others dirty. A child's backpack with the name Sophie written in marker on the front. Ellis felt her stomach twist. "This was a holding spot," she said quietly. "They brought them here." Maggie stood at the entrance of the hidden space, her body low, her tail still. She didn't bark this time. She didn't need to. The place was empty now, but it had been full not long ago. One of the officers moved toward the far wall and paused. "There's a camera," he said, "still recording." Ellis turned quickly. The camera was small, almost hidden in the top corner of the wall, its red light still blinking. She stepped over the scattered belongings and reached up. "Pull the feed," she ordered, "right now." The officer radioed for tech support. Within minutes, a laptop was hooked up, and the footage began to play. There on the screen were shadows, figures moving in and out of the space, children scared and silent, a man in a dark coat with a badge, another with a scar near his lip. Ellis leaned in, heart pounding. They had proof. She looked down at Maggie. "You found them," she whispered. "You really found them." And this time, Maggie wagged her tail. Just once. The room at the station was silent except for the hum of the laptop and the soft tap of Detective Ellis's pen against her notebook. The screen glowed in the dim light, showing grainy black and white footage from the warehouse camera. A few officers stood behind her, arms crossed, their faces tight with focus. Maggie sat beside the desk, her ears up, eyes locked on the moving images. She didn't understand technology, but she understood danger, and what she saw made her body go stiff. The footage showed the hidden room inside the warehouse, a narrow hallway, a dull bulb swinging from the ceiling, and children, small, tired, some clutching stuffed animals, or little backpacks. They moved in single file, guided by masked men who said nothing. No shouting, just quiet orders and cold hands. Ellis leaned closer, scribbling notes. "There," she said. "Pause it." An officer stopped the video. One of the men on screen wore a dark vest, with a logo barely visible through the static. "Zoom in." They enhanced the image. The logo became clearer, two hands holding a heart. "Hope kind." Ellis didn't say anything at first. She just exhaled, long and slow. The name had come up before, in whispers, in reports that led nowhere. But now, it was right in front of them. No more guessing. She hit play again. The children were led to the wall, the same wall where the toys and blankets had been found. They were made to sit, to wait, while the men moved crates and gear. Some kids cried. Others were too tired to make a sound. Then, one of the masked men turned his head, and even through the blur of the footage, a mark could be seen near his mouth. A burn, a sharp line curling at the corner of his lip. Joe's voice echoed in Ellis's mind. He had this scar right here. Looked like a cigarette burn, real nasty. Ellis paused the video. "That's him," she said. "That's the man Joe saw." At that moment, Maggie let out a deep growl, low and steady. Not loud, but sharp enough to make everyone in the room turn. She was staring at the screen. The man with the scar stood still in the video, facing the camera for just a moment. Maggie's growl continued, rising slightly, then stopped. "She's seen him before," one officer said softly. "She remembers," Ellis added. The footage kept playing. Then, something changed. A girl was led in near the end of the recording. Small, shaking. Her shoes were mismatched, her hair in loose braids. Ellis leaned in. The girl looked up at the camera for just a second, and that was all they needed. "Pause," Ellis said. "Zoom on her face." There she was, pale cheeks, wide brown eyes. Layla Ramos. The timestamp in the corner of the screen showed the date. Ellis checked her notes. That was the same morning Maggie had started scratching Joe's backpack. The same day the phone with Layla's photo appeared. The same day everything had started to unravel. "She was there," Ellis said quietly, "and that dog knew it." Maggie looked up at her, silent now. She didn't need praise. She just needed them to keep going, to follow the trail, to find the girl. Detective Ellis sat across from Joe again, this time in a quiet room with no recording equipment and no handcuffs. A fresh cup of coffee sat between them, untouched. Joe looked tired, but his eyes were clear, like something had finally settled in him. Maggie lay at his feet, ears twitching every few seconds, her head resting on her paws. Ellis flipped through her notes. "Is there anything else you remember? Anything about the man with the scar?" Joe rubbed his temples, trying to pull something from the corners of his memory. He had a tattoo, he said finally. I didn't think much of it before, but now, I don't know. It sticks with me. Ellis leaned forward. What kind of tattoo? Joe traced a rough shape on the table with his finger. A lighthouse. Right here. He tapped his left wrist. Black ink. Simple. No waves or boats, just the lighthouse. Ellis froze for a second. She knew that name. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a place. The Lighthouse Campus. She stood up and grabbed her phone. Within minutes, she had confirmation. The Lighthouse Campus had been a children's rehab center about an hour outside the city, closed 5 years ago after funding dried up. The buildings were still standing, but no one had used them in years, or so they thought. Ellis called in the feds. By nightfall, 3 black vans, 2 unmarked SUVs, and a tactical SWAT unit had gathered in a parking lot near the edge of town. Ellis stood near the lead vehicle, checking her gear. She felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. Then she looked down. Maggie was already sitting beside the van door, tail still, eyes wide, body tense. She's coming with us, Ellis said to the agent beside her. You sure? The agent asked. Could be dangerous. She's already in it, Ellis said. And she's not leaving Joe's side. Joe stood near the back of the van, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. He didn't argue. They loaded up. Maggie jumped in first, then sat near the door, staring through the window as the city lights faded behind them. She whined softly, once, then again. Her body was tight with tension. She was breathing fast, ears darting with every sound. Something was pulling her forward. A smell, a memory, maybe both. As they neared the Lighthouse Campus, the roads grew narrow and quiet. Trees pressed close on either side, and the fog rolled low across the ground. Maggie began to whine louder now, shifting in her seat. She pawed at the floor, nose pressed to the crack in the door. She's reacting, Ellis said. She knows we're close. The lead vehicle slowed to a stop in front of the old campus gates. The buildings beyond were dark, broken windows and vines twisting through the stone. But behind the silence, something was moving. A faint hum, a flicker of light deep inside. Ellis turned to the team. Move in, now. And with Maggie at her side, they went. The air around the Lighthouse Campus was thick with fog and silence, broken only by the soft crunch of boots on gravel as the team moved in. Flashlights flicked across the broken windows and crumbling brick walls. The old rehab center had once been a place of healing, but now it stood like a ghost, hiding secrets behind every door. Maggie jumped down from the van before anyone else. She hit the ground running, her nose to the earth, her tail stiff with focus. Detective Ellis followed close behind, her voice low through the radio. Teams 1 and 2, take the east and west wings. We'll move straight into the main building. Maggie stopped at the entrance to a side hallway and barked once, sharp and urgent. Ellis didn't hesitate. Go with her, she ordered. Inside, the building smelled of mold, dust, and something else. Something sour. The hallway was dark, the lights long gone, but Maggie moved without fear. Her paws barely made a sound as she followed the scent, around one corner, down a flight of steps, then toward a thick steel door. She scratched at it, whining now, her whole body shaking. Ellis stepped forward and tried the handle. Locked. Breach it, she said to the agent beside her. With a quick swing of a battering ram, the door crashed open. Inside, 5 small faces turned toward the light. Pale, afraid, but alive. Children, huddled together on the floor. A blanket was draped over 2 of them, and an empty juice box lay nearby. In the back, Layla sat by herself, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes wide and full of fear. When she saw Maggie, her lips parted in a gasp. The dog ran straight to her. Layla threw her arms around Maggie's neck and burst into tears, holding her like she had waited her whole life for that moment. Maggie didn't move. She stood still, head low, letting the child cling to her. She came, Layla whispered. I knew she would. Ellis's voice cracked through the radio. We've got them. All 5. Repeat, 5 kids located. 1 is Layla Ramos. Elsewhere in the building, shouting echoed through the halls as agents made their arrests. In a back room, the man with the cigarette scar was caught trying to escape through a side door. He didn't make it far. The agents tackled him, hands gripping his arms before he could reach for the weapon in his belt. They tore the fake HopeKind badge from his chest. Within an hour, 3 more men were cuffed and loaded into the vans, their faces covered, their lies undone. Files were found in a locked office upstairs, records, names, payment logs. It was all there. A full trafficking ring, run through a charity that had fooled the city. Ellis stood outside the building, her hand resting on Maggie's head. The dog was calm now, her eyes on Layla, who sat in a blanket near the paramedics. She found them, Ellis said to no one in particular. We never would have gotten here without her. And Maggie, the stray no one wanted, had saved 5 lives. The news spread fast. Within hours of the raid at the Lighthouse campus, the headlines lit up. Trafficking, ring exposed, missing children found alive, dog leads police to secret hideout. Maggie's photo was everywhere. Her muddy fur, her watchful eyes, her calm strength. People called her a hero. But to Joe, she'd always been more than that. She had been his anchor when the world felt too heavy. His shadow, his second chance. Joe was cleared within the day. The footage, the fingerprint reports, the confessions, it all lined up. He had nothing to do with the crimes. He had just been in the wrong place, carrying the wrong bag. But the right dog had made sure the truth came out. Detective Ellis was the one who brought him the news. You're a free man, Joe, she said gently. And we've got something for you. There's a place up north, veterans working with dogs like Maggie. They train them, care for them, heal together. They've got a bed waiting if you want it. Joe didn't answer right away. He looked down at Maggie, who was curled at his feet, tail gently thumping against the floor. Sounds like something I could use, he finally said. Me and her both. Meanwhile, Layla was taken to the hospital for a full checkup. She was scared and quiet, but strong. When her parents came running into the room, their cries filled the hallway. She clung to her mom, then reached out for her dad, then whispered, "Where's Maggie?" They tried to explain that Maggie was with the police, that she would come back later. But Layla shook her head. She's mine. She found me. The family asked to adopt Maggie. They offered a big yard, toys, a cozy bed, everything a dog could want. But every time Maggie was brought to their house, she stayed for a few minutes, then slipped away, always returning to Joe. No matter how far they took her, she found her way back. The Ramos family understood. They thanked Joe, hugged him, told him that Maggie would always have a place in their home. But the dog had already made her choice. Weeks passed. The media attention faded. The children recovered slowly, surrounded by care and safety. The Lighthouse campus was sealed off, and HopeKind's leadership was taken down, one by one. There were more arrests, more questions, but the worst part was over. One quiet morning, under a pale blue sky, Joe sat in a small community garden behind the rehab center. A warm breeze moved through the flowers, and bees buzzed lazily nearby. Maggie rested on the grass beside him, eyes half closed. A small hand reached out to touch her fur. Layla. She sat cross-legged in the dirt, a daisy tucked behind one ear. She had come to visit with her parents, who now stayed in touch with Joe, bonded by something none of them could explain. Layla leaned against Maggie's side and sighed. She still watches me, she said softly. Joe nodded. She always will. Detective Ellis stood a few steps away, arms folded, watching them quietly. She smiled and turned toward the camera crew, who had asked her for one final statement. She looked past them, toward the little girl, the broken man, and the dog that had changed everything. Then she spoke. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge, she said. Sometimes it has 4 legs and a bark that won't quit. And Maggie, who had once been astray with no name and nowhere to go, closed her eyes and let the sun warm her face. She was home. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they walk on 4 paws. If you believe in stories like this one, please like this video and subscribe for more incredible tales of loyalty and courage.